Eliza Monroe stirred from a restless sleep, her cheek pressed against the rough bark of the tree. Icy tendrils of wind bit into her skin, and the rattle of metal against wood rang out as she shifted. Her wrists, raw and chafed, were shackled high above her head, iron cuffs digging into flesh swollen and bruised. A thin layer of snow covered her shoulders, her once warm woolen coat now stiff and frayed. She drew in a breath, shallow and hesitant, and felt the bitter air claw at her lungs. The forest around her was cloaked in silence, broken only by the distant creaking of branches burdened by ice. Her body screamed for warmth, for freedom, for anything other than this relentless cold that threatened to devour her whole. Eliza forced herself to move her fingers, grimacing at the lack of sensation. She knew enough to understand that once numbness set in, death would follow. She had counted the days at first, marking the passage of time by the fading daylight and the silver of the moon. But as the nights stretched longer and colder, her awareness slipped, and she lost track. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, more of a dull ache now than the sharp pain it had been. Dehydration left her lips cracked and bleeding, and every whisper of the wind seemed to mock her fragile existence. Her thoughts drifted to the night they came. Men with rough hands and hard voices, dragging her from the small cabin she had built with her husband. They had accused her of theft, of harboring secrets about stolen provisions. She had screamed for mercy, swearing her innocence, but their leader, a tall, grim-faced man named Halston, had not listened. They left her here, chained and abandoned, a cruel justice in their eyes for a crime she never committed. A tear slipped free, burning a path down her cheek, only to freeze halfway. Eliza tried to recall the warmth of her husband's embrace, his deep laughter as he played with their son. The memories felt brittle now, like old paper crumbling in her mind. A sob caught in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She could not afford to waste her energy on grief. She had fought against the chains at first, her wrists bleeding from the effort to slip free. When her screams for help went unanswered, fear gave way to anger, then despair. Now, she simply existed, holding on to some faint thread of hope that someone would find her. Perhaps a passing trapper or a lost soul wandering the woods. But as each day broke with no sign of rescue, that hope dimmed. The sky was a bruised gray, heavy with the threat of more snow. Eliza squinted against the pale light, her vision blurry from exhaustion. A small bird landed nearby, its tiny claws scraping against the icy ground. She watched it peck at the snow, envying its freedom. The world around her was stark and indifferent, a frozen tomb waiting to claim her. Her mind wandered to the warmth of the hearth back in the cabin, the scent of stew simmering over the fire. She could almost feel the softness of her son's tiny hands in hers, hear his giggle as they chased fireflies in the summer dusk. Eliza clenched her jaw, forcing the memories away. They would only break her further. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind howl through the trees, and whispered a prayer under her breath. If death was coming, she hoped it would be swift, not the slow, creeping chill that was already weaving through her bones. A sudden crack of a branch snapped her back to reality. Her heart pounded, eyes darting through the dense thicket. Silence returned, but now every sound seemed amplified, every shadow stretched longer. Eliza strained against the chains, ignoring the pain, her instincts screaming at her to flee. Footsteps, crunching softly through the snow, approached from the west. Panic coiled in her stomach, and she bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. A figure emerged from the trees, moving with a cautious grace. Tall and lean, draped in furs, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings. Eliza's breath hitched, torn between relief and fear. Was it Halston, come to finish what he started, or some other threat lurking in the wilderness? She held her breath, waiting. The man moved closer, his gaze landing on her. He halted, his brow furrowing. Eliza opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her throat was too parched, her voice stolen by the cold. The stranger approached slowly, as if wary of a trap. His face was marked by the harsh lines of survival, his hair pulled back, a single feather woven into the braid. He knelt before her, examining the chains, his gloved hands tracing the iron with a grim expression. She tried again, forcing her voice through cracked lips. "Help, please." The words were barely more than a rasp, but his eyes flicked to hers, assessing. He pulled a knife from his belt, the blade gleaming even in the dim light. Eliza flinched, but he did not move toward her, instead inspecting the lock on the chains. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Then, with a swift motion, he jammed the knife into the shackle's keyhole, working it with careful precision. A low grunt of frustration escaped him as the ice-encrusted metal resisted. He muttered something in a language Eliza didn't understand, but his tone was one of determination. The chains finally gave way with a metallic snap, and Eliza collapsed forward, caught by the stranger before she hit the ground. He eased her to a sitting position, propping her against the tree. She looked up at him, her vision swimming. He offered a flask, and she took it with trembling hands, the water tasting sharper than any memory. His expression softened, though his eyes remained guarded. She didn't know who he was or why he had chosen to help, but in that moment, gratitude overwhelmed her. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but the weight of days spent alone and terrified pulled her under. Darkness seeped in at the edges of her vision, and she let herself go. The last thing she felt was the warmth of his hand steadying her. When she awoke, the sky had darkened, and a small fire crackled nearby. The man was still there, tending to the flames. Eliza flexed her fingers, surprised by the return of feeling. The stranger glanced over, offering her a piece of dried meat. She hesitated, then took it, savoring the taste despite its toughness. "Thank you," she managed, voice rough. The man nodded, not offering words. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, more like the quiet of a winter night shared between those who had seen too much. Eliza's mind spun with questions. Who was he? Why had he helped? And would the men who left her return? But for now, just being free from the tree, the chains gone, was enough. The man looked at her with a calm that seemed rooted in the land itself. Eliza wanted to ask his name, but exhaustion pulled her back under. As sleep claimed her, she could still feel his presence, a silent sentinel against the cold, and for the first time in days, hope flickered in her. Eliza awoke to the soft crackle of firewood and the dull ache of returning warmth. Her limbs trembled as heat seeped into her bones, the thawing agony nearly as unbearable as the cold that had threatened to steal her life. She opened her eyes slowly, lids heavy and swollen, and saw the man crouched by the fire's edge, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. His presence was both a comfort and a puzzle. She could not understand why he had freed her, nor why he had chosen to stay. The thought of waking to find herself alone again had haunted her dreams, but he remained, a silent shadow, keeping the darkness at bay. Eliza struggled to sit up, muscles stiff and protesting. Her breath hissed through her teeth, but she forced herself upright, drawing the rough blanket he had laid over her close around her shoulders. The man's gaze flickered toward her, his dark eyes assessing. There was a hardness there, but also something gentler, something she could not name. "Thank you," she said, her voice still rasping, as though the chains had not only bound her wrists but her words as well. He nodded, the gesture slight, more acknowledgement than reply. His knife rested beside him, gleaming in the firelight, its blade sharp and well cared for. He was a man who understood survival, who thrived in these harsh, unforgiving lands. His face bore the marks of experience, weathered skin, sharp lines etched by cold and hardship. Eliza's curiosity stirred despite her exhaustion. "Why did you help me?" For a moment, she thought he might ignore the question, but his gaze met hers, and he spoke in slow, measured words. "You were dying." His voice was deep, carrying a weight she could not quite decipher. It was not kindness alone that had driven him to intervene. Duty, perhaps, or something else altogether. She pressed her lips together, sensing the reluctance in his manner. He had no desire for conversation, yet he remained. "My name is Eliza," she offered, her tone cautious. "Eliza Monroe." He regarded her in silence before speaking. "Chaska." The name settled between them like fresh snow, its simplicity and strength reflecting the man himself. She nodded, the effort costing her more than she cared to admit. "Where are we?" "Far from where they left you," he said. "Safe for now." She tried to suppress the shiver that ran through her at the mention of her captors. Halston and his men had been cruel, their judgment swift and merciless. They had not cared for her innocence, only the satisfaction of casting blame for their own failings. "Those men," she started, her voice breaking. "They'll come back, won't they?" Chaska's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps, but they do not know these lands as I do." His confidence was not arrogance, it was fact. Eliza found herself believing him, though fear still coiled in her stomach. If Halston returned, his vengeance would be brutal. But Chaska had freed her from chains. He had kept her alive. She clung to that small mercy like a lifeline. Days passed in a rhythm of silence and brief exchanges. Chaska hunted and gathered, his movements swift and efficient. He brought her strips of dried meat, bitter roots, and once a small bundle of berries that tasted like hope. Each day her strength returned, though her wrists remained bandaged, the skin beneath scarred and tender. The language between them was sparse, more gestures than words. Chaska was not unkind, but neither was he gentle. He worked with precision, his focus always on survival. Eliza admired his skill, his uncanny ability to read the land's secrets. She began to study him, noticing the way his gaze swept their surroundings, how his fingers traced the ground's contours to read what she could not see. One night, as the fire sputtered against a rising wind, Eliza found the courage to speak. "Were you out there looking for me?" "No." His response was blunt, but not cruel. "I hunt the men who chained you." The revelation struck her like a blow. She straightened, eyes wide. "What?" "They came through my village, took what they wanted, left death behind." Chaska's words were flat, devoid of emotion, but the grief in his eyes was unmistakable. Eliza felt shame ripple through her. She had been so consumed by her own suffering that she had not considered what pain others might carry. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, acknowledging her words but not accepting them. Forgiveness was not what he sought. Vengeance, perhaps. Justice, certainly. "What will you do when you find them?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "End them." There was no hesitation, no hint of doubt. His resolve was absolute, forged by loss and sharpened by time. Eliza felt her heart quicken, her own anger rekindling. Halston and his men had left her to die, believing her weak, unworthy of mercy. She could not forget the sound of their laughter as they walked away, the iron bite of the shackles sinking into her wrists. "Take me with you." The words tumbled from her mouth before she could reconsider. Chaska's brow furrowed, his expression darkening. "No, I can fight. I can help you find them. You can barely walk." His words stung, but they were true. Still, Eliza's desperation overpowered her reason. "I'll get stronger. You kept me alive this long. Teach me." For a moment, Chaska simply stared at her. His eyes were cold, calculating, weighing her words like stones. Finally, he spoke. "Why?" "Because they took everything from me," she said, her voice trembling. "And I can't bear to live with that. Not without trying to take something back." Chaska's silence was long and heavy. Then, with a reluctant nod, he gestured for her to stand. Eliza pushed herself to her feet, her legs wobbling but holding. It was not strength that kept her upright, but fury, a burning, consuming need for retribution. The following days became a trial by fire. Chaska showed her how to move through the forest without leaving a trace, how to set snares and fish the icy streams. Her body ached from the effort, but pain became familiar, almost comforting. It meant she was alive, that she was fighting for something beyond mere survival. They spoke little, but their silence grew companionable. She learned to read his gestures, to anticipate his intentions before he voiced them. He tested her, pushed her limits, and when she stumbled, He watched her claw her way back up without offering aid. She grew stronger. Her movements became deliberate, her gaze sharper. The air no longer felt like an enemy, but a challenge she could meet. She followed Chaska's instructions with a fervor that bordered on madness, each lesson another rung on her climb toward vengeance. One evening, as they sat by the fire's glow, Chaska handed her a knife. Its weight was solid, the blade curved and sharp. Her fingers curled around the hilt, her grip steady. "Why now?" she asked, glancing up at him. "You are ready." The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. Eliza nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. But beneath her determination, a deeper connection had begun to form. In his silence, she had found strength. In his guidance, a reason to keep moving. And when she finally drifted into sleep, the knife resting beside her, she dreamed not of chains and frostbitten death, but of fire and blood and the promise of something more. The knife felt natural in her hand now, the once alien weight transformed into something familiar and comforting. Eliza's grip was firm, her movements quick and deliberate as she sliced through branches to fashion a makeshift shelter. Chaska watched her from a distance, his gaze as unreadable as ever. But she had learned to interpret the subtle shifts in his expression, the nearly imperceptible nods of approval he granted when her progress pleased him. Days bled into weeks, and her body grew stronger, tempered by hunger, fatigue, and the relentless cold. Chaska's training was harsh, unforgiving as the land itself. He pushed her to the edge of endurance, testing her limits until her legs trembled and her fingers bled. And when she faltered, he simply waited, offering no comfort beyond the silent expectation that she would rise again. She did. Every time, their communication remained sparse, though not for lack of effort on Eliza's part. Chaska's reticence was a barrier she could not breach, his words carefully measured, his demeanor distant. Yet his actions spoke volumes. When he caught a hare, he shared it without question. When the fire needed tending, he showed her the proper way to feed it, coaxing the flames to life even under a sky thick with snow. They worked in tandem, their shared purpose sharpening their bond. Eliza's determination had evolved from blind rage into something colder, more precise. Vengeance was no longer a vague hunger gnawing at her soul. It was a goal, a path she had chosen with clear-eyed certainty. Chaska taught her to read the land, to follow tracks through mud and snow, to listen for the faintest rustle of disturbed brush. Her senses sharpened, the dull haze of pain and grief replaced by the clarity of intent. He drilled her with the knife until her movements were fluid, instinctive. The cuts on her palms healed into calluses, the ache in her muscles a constant reminder of how far she had come. One morning, as the sky brightened with the faint blush of dawn, Chaska gestured for her to follow him. His manner was brisk, his eyes fierce. She matched his pace, her breath clouding in the chill air. They tracked for hours, moving through dense thickets and across frozen streams. Chaska's steps were soundless, his presence as elusive as smoke. Eliza mimicked his movements, careful not to disturb the brittle silence. At the crest of a hill, Chaska halted, his gaze fixed on something beyond the tangled expanse of trees. Eliza crouched beside him, her chest heaving from the exertion. "There," Chaska whispered, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. Eliza followed his line of sight and saw it, a small encampment nestled between the rocks, the remnants of a fire smoldering in the cold morning air. Men moved about, their voices muffled by distance, but recognizable by their coarse, barking tones. Halston's men. Her blood went cold, every nerve alight with a mingling of fear and fury. The months of training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could still the wild hammering of her heart. Chaska's gaze remained fixed on the camp, his expression impassive. 6 men, he said, 2 on watch, the others sleep. His analysis was clinical, his words sharp and unyielding. Eliza clenched her jaw, her hands trembling as she fought to maintain composure. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice thin but steady. Chaska regarded her with the same unwavering intensity he had shown since the day he freed her. We wait, learn their patterns, strike when they're weakest. Patience. It was a lesson he had drilled into her from the beginning. Yet the sight of those men, so close, taunted her with the promise of retribution. She wanted to storm the camp, to carve her anger into their flesh, to reclaim the power they had stolen from her. But she did not move. Instead, she followed Chaska's lead, watching from their vantage point as the men went about their routines. Their weapons were carelessly stacked by the fire, their conversations loud and careless. Their arrogance only deepened her resolve. Days passed in the cold shadow of the hillside. Chaska and Eliza observed, marking the habits of their prey with meticulous precision. She learned their names, their roles within the group. Halston was not among them, but the others were there, the ones who had laughed as they left her to die. When Chaska spoke of the attack, his voice was calm and measured. Tonight, when the fire burns low, 2 will be on watch. The others will sleep. He glanced at her, his expression guarded. Are you ready? Eliza met his gaze, the icy certainty of her purpose reflected back at her. Yes. They crept through the darkness like wraiths, their footsteps muffled by the soft cushion of snow. The camp's fire had dwindled to a weak glow, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and unwashed bodies. Chaska moved ahead, his knife already drawn, eyes sharp and unyielding. Eliza followed, her own blade clutched tight in her hand. The months of training had honed her reflexes, but nothing could have prepared her for the visceral terror that coursed through her veins. Her breathing came fast and shallow, her heart a thunderous drumbeat against her ribs. They struck with the precision of hunters. Chaska took down the first guard with ruthless efficiency, his knife slicing through the man's throat before he could make sound. Eliza mirrored his actions, her own blade plunging into the chest of the second sentry. Blood spilled hot over her hands. The man's eyes wide with shock before the light left them altogether. There was no time for hesitation. Chaska gestured toward the tents, his expression as hard as stone. Eliza moved forward, her limbs trembling but her resolve unbroken. She tore through the canvas, her knife raised and ready. The men within scrambled for their weapons, their confusion giving her the advantage. She slashed and stabbed, her strikes wild but effective. Pain flared in her shoulder as a fist connected, but she retaliated with savage force, driving her blade into flesh until the man collapsed in a heap. The battle was brutal, chaotic. Chaska's presence was a constant anchor, his movements swift and deadly. They fought with a desperation born of purpose, their enemies falling one by one. When the last man lay motionless at her feet, Eliza dropped to her knees, her chest heaving, her hands slick with blood. The world swayed around her, a dizzying blur of violence and triumph. Chaska stood beside her, his gaze unreadable. You fought well. She nodded, her throat tight. Was Halston here? No. The word cut through her like a blade. The one man she craved vengeance against had eluded them once more. Eliza's shoulders sagged, the exhaustion of the fight weighing her down. But beneath the disappointment, a fierce determination remained. Halston was still out there, his cruelty unchecked, and she would not rest until justice had been served. Chaska watched her, his expression softened by something she could not quite name. This was only the beginning, he said. You are stronger now, but the path ahead will be harder. I'm not afraid, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. And as the dawn crept over the horizon, staining the snow with a pale golden light, she knew she spoke the truth. The trail grew colder with each passing day. Winter's grip tightened around the world, snow thickening across the plains and forests until even the air tasted sharp and metallic. Eliza and Chaska pushed onward, their determination a fragile but unyielding ember. Despite the bitter cold and gnawing hunger, they moved with purpose, each step drawing them closer to the man who had wronged them both. Their bond had solidified through blood and struggle, the unspoken understanding between them deepening. They spoke more now, Eliza's words spilling freely, as if breaking her silence might banish the shadows still clinging to her thoughts. Chaska listened with quiet patience, his responses brief but thoughtful. He shared pieces of his own history, fragments of a life torn apart by Halston's cruelty. His family had been scattered, his people threatened and weakened by raids carried out under the guise of settling disputes. Eliza found herself drawn to his resilience, his relentless will to protect what little remained. He had suffered, but his pain had been forged into something sharper, something that cut through his enemies with lethal precision. She admired him for that, even as her own wounds struggled to heal. Halston's name was a curse between them, uttered only when necessary. His brutality stretched far beyond the tree where she had been left to die. Villages plundered, families scattered, all beneath the banner of so-called justice. Chaska's rage was personal, a deep wound masked by his outward composure. But Eliza's anger was raw and desperate, a fire that burned brighter each time they found another trace of Halston's cruelty. It was during one of their silent marches that they came across a small trading post, its weathered walls sagging beneath the weight of accumulated snow. The proprietor, a nervous man with darting eyes, eyed them warily as they entered. Eliza's worn appearance and Chaska's stoic presence unsettled him, but the promise of coin loosened his tongue. Halston passed through here, the trader confessed, his voice a shaky whisper. Bought supplies, bragged about some bounty he's after, said he was headed north, to the old fort. The revelation struck Eliza like a fist. Halston was close, his trail fresh enough to follow. She exchanged a glance with Chaska, her pulse quickening. They left the trading post without further words, urgency propelling their steps. The journey north was grueling. The wind howled like a living beast, tearing at their clothing and biting through their skin. Days blurred into a constant struggle against the elements, but neither spoke of turning back. Eliza's strength had grown, her movements as assured and precise as Chaska's. She hunted alongside him, her hands steady as she skinned rabbits and snared fish. The wild had carved her anew, the fear and doubt that once plagued her now buried beneath layers of resilience. Yet, as they neared the fort, her anxiety flared, the specter of her former captors haunting her thoughts. Would she falter when the moment came? Would her courage prove brittle when faced with Halston's cruelty once more? She voiced her fears one night as they sat by a low-burning fire, her words slipping free before she could reconsider. What if I fail? Chaska's gaze met hers, his eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. Failure is not trying. The simplicity of his response startled her. He spoke as though success or failure were concepts crafted by men who feared consequence more than inaction. For Chaska, the only sin was doing nothing. Eliza let his words sink in, drawing strength from their simplicity. She had come too far to falter now. Halston was within reach, his blood price waiting to be collected. They found the fort at dusk, its crumbling walls bathed in the dim orange light of a dying sun. What had once been a military outpost was now a fortress of desperation, inhabited by bandits and deserters loyal only to Halston's ruthless command. Eliza and Chaska observed from the cover of trees, their breaths fogging the frigid air. Fires dotted the interior of the fort, figures moving like shadows across the battered courtyard. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, their vigilance born of fear rather than discipline. Too many to face head-on, Chaska muttered, his eyes narrowing. We draw them out, Eliza replied, her voice steady. Divide them. Take them down one by one. Chaska's nod was swift, approval gleaming in his gaze. They spent hours planning, whispering strategies beneath the cover of darkness. By the time the moon rose high above, their course was set. They struck at midnight. Eliza crept along the outskirts of the fort, her footsteps silent as snowflakes. She cut through ropes holding supply barrels aloft, sending them crashing to the ground with a thunderous clatter. The guards rushed toward the noise, weapons drawn, their shouts echoing into the night. Chaska was upon them before they could react. his knife flashing like a serpent's fawn. Eliza followed his lead, her blade moving with lethal precision. The battle was a blur of blood and screams. Men fell before them, their surprise swiftly turning to terror. Eliza's movements were swift, her strikes sure. She fought not with rage, but with purpose, each swing of her knife guided by the knowledge that this was her only chance at redemption. They tore through the fort's defenses with ruthless efficiency, scattering Halston's men like chaff before the wind. The survivors fled into the night, their courage spent. Eliza's breath came in ragged bursts as she stumbled through the wreckage, her eyes searching for the man who had haunted her every waking moment. Chaska moved beside her, his presence a silent assurance. They found Halston in the main hall, surrounded by the remnants of his stolen wealth. His face twisted into a sneer as they entered, his hand already reaching for the rifle resting against a chair. Eliza moved first, her blade flashing toward his chest. Halston dodged, his own knife slicing through the air with vicious intent. They circled each other, their movements fueled by hatred and desperation. Chaska held back, his stance guarded. This was Eliza's fight, her vengeance. Halston's words were taunts, laced with disdain. I should have left you for the wolves. You've got more fight than I thought, but it won't save you. Eliza's reply was a snarl, her anger sharp and cold. She lunged forward, her knife carving a shallow gash along his arm. Halston retaliated with a brutal strike, his fist slamming into her ribs. Pain exploded through her side, but she kept her footing, refusing to falter. Their struggle continued, brutal and unrelenting. But Halston's arrogance had dulled his edge. He underestimated her, believing her still the helpless woman he had left chained to a tree. With a final, desperate strike, Eliza drove her blade deep into his chest. Halston's eyes widened, his mouth gaping as blood bubbled from his lips. He crumpled to the ground, his body twitching before stillness claimed him. Eliza stood over him, her chest heaving, the knife trembling in her hand. It's done, Chaska said, his voice low and steady. She met his gaze, her eyes brimming with something she could not name. Relief, grief, vindication. They walked from the ruins of the fort as the sky began to brighten with the first glow of dawn. The fire of vengeance had burned itself out, leaving Eliza hollow but alive.
Chaska remained at her side, his presence a balm against the emptiness. Together, they walked toward an uncertain future, bound by pain, resilience, and something deeper.
The train hissed as it lurched to a stop, steam billowing around its iron frame. Eleanor Whitmore tightened her grip on the worn leather handle of her traveling bag. The moment she had dreamed of, the promise of a new beginning, was finally here. Her heart pounded beneath the confines of her corset as she scanned the dusty platform. A man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his face chiseled from years of work under the sun. Lucas Grady. She had memorized his name, traced it over and over in ink, crafting an image of him through his letters. The words had been brief, gruff but promising. A husband, a home, a future. But now, as his gaze settled on her, something shifted. His lips curled downward. His eyes, a sharp blue, beneath the brim of his hat, turned cold. He took a step closer, arms folded across his chest. You ain't what I ordered. The words struck like a slap. Eleanor stiffened, clutching the letter in her free hand, the paper crinkling. I don't understand. Lucas plucked the letter from her grasp, scanning it as if seeing it for the first time. Then he scoffed and tossed it onto the dirt at her feet. Somebody lied to you, lady. Or maybe you lied to me. Heat rose to Eleanor's face. I didn't. You look like a church mouse, he interrupted. Too soft. Too breakable. You wouldn't last a week out here. The platform had fallen silent. The townsfolk watched, their curiosity sharper than knives. A woman in a bonnet whispered to her husband. A young boy pointed. Eleanor's chest tightened. I came all this way, she said, forcing steel into her voice. You promised. I promised nothing. Lucas took a step back, shaking his head. I need a woman who can work, not some delicate thing who'll faint at the first sight of blood. You're on your own, Miss Whitmore. Eleanor's throat clenched. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Please, she whispered. Lucas turned, boots scuffing the wooden planks, as he walked away. The crowd began to disperse, disinterest settling in. No one offered a kind word or an outstretched hand. Eleanor remained frozen, her pulse thudding in her ears. She had nowhere to go. No family waiting. No money beyond what rattled in her small purse. A sharp laugh cut through the heavy air. Well, ain't that something to... She turned. A man leaned against a wooden post near the saloon, the brim of his hat tilted just enough to cast his face in shadow. He was thick in the shoulders, his coat straining against a belly fed well on other men's misfortune. A cigar smoldered between his fingers. Macready. She had heard the name in passing. Owner of a saloon, dealer of flesh, a man who made his fortune from the desperate. Looks like you're in a bit of a predicament, darlin', he drawled. Eleanor took a step back, her pulse jumping. I'll be fine. He chuckled low and knowing. No, you won't. Two men stepped up beside him, their expressions vacant, but their eyes hungry. The way I see it, Macready continued, you got no roof, no job, no prospects. But don't you worry none. We always got room for a girl like you. Her stomach turned. I'm not. A rough hand clamped around her wrist. She yanked back, panic flooding her veins. Let me go. The pressure tightened. A sharp yank sent her stumbling forward. Her bag hit the ground, the clasp breaking open. Her meager possessions spilled onto the dirt. Stockings, a small Bible, a silver locket that had belonged to her mother. A boot ground into the locket, pressing it into the earth. Terror coiled around her ribs like a vice. Help me, she screamed. No one moved. The sheriff stood at the end of the platform, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He turned away. Macready leaned in close, his breath reeking of whiskey. Ain't no one coming, sweetheart. He wrenched her toward him, dragging her down the steps. Eleanor kicked, twisted, nails clawing at his grip. He laughed. The brothel loomed ahead, its windows glowing with the dull warmth of lamplight. A woman leaned against the doorway, painted lips curving into a smirk. New blood, she mused. She'll learn, Macready grunted. Eleanor's pulse screamed. She lashed out, nails raking across his cheek. A bellow of pain. Then a fist, hard and unforgiving, cracked against her jaw. The world spun. She hit the ground, dust rising around her. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorted. A shadow shifted in the alley, unseen by all but one. Chayton watched. He had been watching since the moment she stepped off that train. He had seen the rejection, the moment the crowd turned cold. He had seen Macready's greed spark like flint against dry brush. And now, he saw the fight leave her as the saloon doors swallowed her whole. His jaw clenched. This was not his fight, but neither had it been his sister's. And she had been taken just the same. Eleanor came to in a room thick with the scent of cheap perfume and sweat. The dim glow of an oil lamp cast long shadows against floral wallpaper, peeling at the corners. Her jaw ached. Her wrists burned where rough fingers had gripped too hard. She pushed herself upright. The movement sent a sharp sting through her ribs. The door creaked open. The madam entered, her eyes assessing, sharp as glass. You fight, you get hurt worse, she said simply. Eleanor swallowed, bile rising in her throat. You'll work or you'll be sold somewhere worse, the madam continued. That's how it goes. Eleanor's nails dug into the mattress. She had dreamed of a new life, an escape from the confines of expectation. Now, she had walked straight into a cage. She turned her head slightly, catching movement beyond the thin curtains. A shadow, watching, waiting. Her heart thudded, a whisper of something close to hope stirring in the darkness. The days blurred together, a haze of dimly lit rooms and forced smiles. Eleanor's jaw still ached from Macready's fist, but worse was the emptiness creeping into her chest. She had stopped pleading. The women here had told her it wouldn't help. The only way out was to break, or to belong to someone willing to fight for her. And no one would. The saloon stank of whiskey and unwashed bodies. The air buzzed with conversation, men laughing, coins clinking. Macready sat at his usual table, watching his girls work. his gaze slithering over them like a predator deciding which piece of meat to bite first. Eleanor knew it was only a matter of time before he decided it was her turn. She had tried to run once. The punishment had been swift, a boot to her ribs, a locked room, 2 days without food. She wasn't sure she could survive another attempt. But then she saw him. He sat near the bar, hat low, the flickering lamplight casting shadows across his face. He wasn't like the others. His movements were too still, too controlled. He wasn't drinking, wasn't laughing. He was waiting. The stranger lifted his head slightly, and for the first time, their eyes met. A flicker of recognition. Eleanor's breath caught. The shadow. The one she had seen outside her window that first night. Something passed between them. Something unspoken but sharp as a blade. Then he looked away. She should have felt abandoned. But for the first time in days, she felt something else. Watched. That night, the madam sent Eleanor upstairs. "You've rested long enough," she murmured, fingers tracing the bruises along Eleanor's wrist. "Tonight you work." She didn't have time to beg. 2 hands shoved her through a door, slamming it behind her. A man sat on the bed, back turned. Heavy set, reeking of sweat and ale. Eleanor's stomach twisted. The man grunted, running a hand through thinning hair. "Come here, girl." She backed against the door, heart hammering. The stranger moved. The candle sputtered as he turned, and in the dim glow, she saw the flash of steel. A knife. She didn't think. She ran. His hand caught her wrist, yanking her back. She screamed. Then glass shattered. The window exploded inward, shards raining down as a dark figure burst through. The man on the bed barely had time to curse before a fist collided with his skull, sending him sprawling. Eleanor gasped, stumbling back. Chayton. He loomed over the unconscious man, his breath steady, his movements deliberate. He turned, eyes locking onto hers. "Move." She hesitated. Then a voice boomed from below. "Someone's in the girls' room." Chayton grabbed her wrist. Now. They ran. The hallway erupted with noise, doors swinging open, footsteps pounding the stairs. Chayton led her through the back corridors, his movements precise, knowing. He had studied this place. A door ahead, the kitchen. Beyond it, the alley. They burst through, into the cold night air. The wind hit Eleanor like a slap, the scent of horses and dust flooding her senses. She barely had time to take a breath before Chayton shoved her forward. "Run." She ran. Behind them, men shouted. A gunshot cracked the night. Eleanor flinched, her feet nearly slipping in the dirt, but Chayton yanked her upright, dragging her toward the stables. A single horse stood saddled, as if waiting for them. Chayton swung up first, then pulled her after him. She barely had time to clutch his waist before he kicked the animal into motion. The town blurred behind them, lanterns flickering, voices rising in anger. McCready's rage echoed over the rooftops. "Find her. Bring her back." They rode hard into the night, the pounding of hooves drowning out the chaos they left behind. The wind whipped Eleanor's hair, her dress torn, her breath ragged. She pressed her forehead against Chayton's back, the warmth of his body the only thing grounding her in the moment. They didn't stop until the lights of the town had vanished, until the only sound was the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the distant howl of a coyote. Only then did Chayton pull back on the reins, slowing them to a halt near a dried riverbed. The night stretched around them, vast and empty. Eleanor slid off the horse, her legs trembling beneath her. She pressed a hand to her ribs, her breath shallow. "Who are you?" Chayton dismounted in one fluid motion, his movements unhurried. He adjusted the knife at his belt before meeting her gaze. "You needed help," he said simply. She shook her head. "Why?" He hesitated. Then, quietly, "Because no one helped my sister." The words were sharp, edged with something she couldn't quite grasp. She studied him, his sharp features, the set of his jaw, the way his fingers flexed at his sides as if bracing for something unseen. "McCready will come after us," she whispered. Chayton nodded. "Yes." A pause. "Then what do we do?" His gaze flicked to the horizon. The first traces of dawn stretched across the sky, streaks of purple and orange bleeding into the darkness. "We run," he said, "until we're somewhere he won't follow." Eleanor swallowed. She had nothing. No home, no family, no place to return to. She took one last look in the direction they had come. Then she turned toward the unknown. The fire burned low, casting long shadows against the rock walls. Eleanor sat stiffly, arms wrapped around herself, exhaustion warring with the cold. Chayton moved quietly, securing the horse, his movements precise, practiced. She had stopped asking where they were going. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that they had stayed ahead of McCready's men, for now. She should have been relieved. Instead, dread gnawed at her ribs. Chayton crouched beside the fire, gaze flickering to her bruised wrists. "You should rest." She shook her head. "We both know they won't stop hunting me." His jaw tightened. "No, they won't." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant howl of wolves. Then, low and certain, Chayton spoke. "We finish this." Eleanor studied him. His face, hardened by past losses, was unreadable. But there was no mistaking the resolve in his eyes. "They'll come armed," she said. He nodded. "So will we." She swallowed, glancing at the rifle he had taken from the saloon stable. She had never fired one before. "They took my sister." Chayton's voice was quiet, but edged with something dark. "I won't let them take you too." Something shifted inside her. A spark, buried beneath weeks of fear. She wasn't going to be taken. Not again. Chayton watched her, then handed her the rifle. It was heavier than she expected. "Point. Breathe. Fire," he instructed. Nothing else. She exhaled slowly, gripping the weapon. Then the sound came, distant at first. Hooves. She stiffened. Chayton was already on his feet, knife glinting in the firelight. They had found them. McCready's men crested the ridge, dark shapes against the moonlit sky. 5 riders. Maybe more. The leader reined in first, his silhouette familiar, loathsome. McCready. His voice slithered through the darkness. "You gave us quite the chase, girl." Eleanor's grip tightened on the rifle. McCready chuckled, dismounting. "Now you know how this ends." His gaze slid to Chayton. "Step aside, savage. This ain't your fight." Chayton didn't move. "She's not going anywhere." McCready sighed. "Shame." He raised a hand. The gunshot cracked through the night. Eleanor flinched, but the bullet missed. A warning shot. Chayton didn't hesitate. He moved fast, drawing his own gun and firing. One of McCready's men cried out, toppling from his horse. Chaos erupted. McCready lunged for cover as his men returned fire. Bullets whistled past, kicking up dust. Eleanor ducked behind a boulder, heart hammering. Chayton fired again. Another man dropped. McCready snarled, "Kill him." Eleanor's breath came fast. She clutched the rifle, Chayton's words echoing in her mind. "Point. Breathe. Fire." She steadied her hands, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The shot slammed into a rider's shoulder, knocking him back. Shock jolted through her. She had hit him. Chayton took advantage of the opening, charging forward. His knife flashed, one swift strike, and another man fell. Then McCready was on him. The 2 men collided, rolling in the dirt, fists swinging. McCready was strong, but Chayton fought like a man who had lost too much to lose again. Eleanor scrambled to reload, hands shaking. McCready drew his gun, pressing it against Chayton's ribs. Eleanor moved without thinking. She swung the rifle like a club, cracking it against McCready's skull. He staggered, cursing. Chayton seized the moment. One strike. The knife sank deep. McCready gasped, eyes wide. Then he collapsed. Silence fell. Eleanor stood frozen, chest heaving. The remaining man, wounded, terrified, scrambled onto his horse and fled. The battle was over. Chayton exhaled, wiping blood from his knife. His gaze met Eleanor's. "You did good." She nodded, though her hands still trembled. McCready lay still. For the first time since this nightmare began, she was free. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying away the last echoes of gunfire. Chayton stepped closer, his presence steady, grounding. "It's over." She let out a shaky breath. "What now?" His gaze softened. "Wherever you want to go." She looked at the horizon, the sky stretching endless before them. Then she turned to him. "Somewhere they won't find me." Chade nodded. "Then that's where we'll go." And together they rode toward the dawn.
The wheels screamed like tortured souls as the train shrieked into Bitter Ridge. Iron ground against iron, screeching across the barren silence of the frontier. Black smoke curled into a sky already bruised with storm clouds. The doors groaned open, and Annabelle Grace stepped out, one gloved hand clutching her carpet bag, the other gripping a folded letter that had once seemed like a lifeline. Her left boot sank slightly into the mud that had pooled along the platform, slick from the earlier rain. The moment she shifted her weight, the limp she'd worked so hard to hide betrayed her. Her hip hitched, subtle but enough to catch eyes. One cowboy leaned against a post and snorted. Another whispered something to the man beside him, drawing a chuckle. Annabelle kept her chin high. She was used to stares. She'd collected them all her life like stray nails in the road, shiny, sharp, and dangerous underfoot. But today was supposed to be different. She wore her finest dress, light blue with small cream flowers stitched around the hem. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun, and she'd even touched rouge to her cheeks before leaving Kansas. She'd reread the letter a dozen times on the train. "I seek a wife of quiet virtue, loyalty, strength. Physical beauty matters less than moral character." Signed, Thomas McGree, rancher of Standing Means. He had sounded kind, thoughtful, maybe a little stiff but steady. That was all she'd wanted. A place to belong. A man who saw beyond the limp. Someone to build something with. The man waiting at the edge of the platform was tall, broad, and clean-shaven, dressed in a gray coat that probably cost more than her father's horse ever had. He had the kind of face you'd see on the cover of a dime novel. Angular jaw, proud nose, eyes that seemed to weigh every inch of a person like currency. "You Annabelle Grace?" he asked, voice dry as sand. "Yes," she said, extending a hand. He didn't take it. His eyes dropped to her side, tracking the slight tilt in her stance. "That your real walk?" he asked. She blinked. "Pardon, that limp." He spat to the side, his jaw tightening. "You didn't say nothing about being crippled." The breath caught in her throat. "I'm not. You are. Don't need a doctor to see it. And don't much appreciate being lied to." "I never lied," she whispered. "You said beauty didn't matter. That character." He cut her off with a bark of laughter. "Character don't build barns or carry water. I need a wife, not a liability." The words hit harder than the bitter wind that tore through the station. Around them, townsfolk watched like it was a show. One woman shook her head, muttering, "Poor thing." Another man whistled low, as if disappointed the spectacle wasn't bloodier. Annabelle's cheeks burned. "You asked for strength. I've survived worse than a man's bruised pride." "Not my pride that's bruised, sweetheart," he said, stepping back. "It's my judgment." He turned, whistled, and a black gelding trotted up the road. He mounted effortlessly. "Go back east. You don't belong out here." Then he was gone, dust and disdain trailing behind him. She stood motionless as the wind picked up, tugging at her dress like even the weather wanted her gone. Her carpet bag tipped from her fingers, landing in a muddy puddle. A man snickered near the saloon. Another muttered something crude about crippled whores and desperation. Her knees trembled, but she didn't fall. She'd done enough of that in her youth. Instead, she picked up the bag with trembling fingers, her gloves now stained, her boots splattered. The train had already started backing down the tracks. There was nowhere to go. She walked, slow and purposeful, down the rutted street. Each step a reminder. She had been unwanted before, but never so publicly, never so completely. Rain began again, soft at first, then heavy. Thunder growled in the distance. The town offered no shelter. Doors were closed. Curtains twitched. Even the dogs ignored her. She kept moving. Lightning split the sky as she reached the edge of Bitter Ridge. The muddy road turned to gravel, then rough dirt, carving through open land that stretched into the waiting wilderness. Her skirts were soaked to the hem, and the carpet bag had grown heavier with every step. Her right hand ached from the grip. Her left leg burned with each step, the ache in her hip now a deep throb. Just as she crested a shallow ridge, The sound of hoofbeats approached behind her. Steady, not hurried. Not McGree. This rider moved differently. She turned slowly, rain dripping from her lashes. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop a few feet away. A dapple-gray mare snorted steam into the cool air. The man wore a long coat, dust-slicked and faded. His hat was tilted forward, hiding most of his face. But when he looked up, his eyes were the kind that made silence seem sacred, warm, steady, and filled with something she hadn't seen all day. Concern. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, voice low but strong. "I'm fine," she lied. "You're soaked, bleeding from your knuckles. Limp in bad." That's a mighty specific version of fine you got there. She didn't answer. What could she say? That she'd crossed half the country on a promise and been tossed aside like spoiled meat? That her last chance had just ridden off without looking back? He tilted his head, clearly not in any hurry. "You got anywhere to be?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "No family waiting? No room at the inn?" She shook her head. He swung down from the saddle in one smooth motion. The mare stayed still, like she knew her rider well. "My name's Levi Callahan," he said, holding the reins loosely. "Ain't a preacher, ain't a doctor, and sure as hell ain't looking for a wife. But I've got a dry cabin 3 miles west. Fire's lit. Coffee's hot. You can ride or walk, but I don't recommend the latter." Annabelle hesitated. Everything in her had been trained to distrust kindness, especially from strange men on strange roads. But the way he stood, hands relaxed, no smirk on his face, just a quiet patience, told her this was different. She stared at the horizon behind him. Open land. No safety. No tracks. Just more emptiness. Then she looked back into those eyes. "I don't take charity," she said. He gave the smallest smile. "Good. Ain't offering any. Just sharing what I've got." She didn't answer right away. The wind picked up, howling low like something ancient and hungry. Her fingers clenched the handle of the bag tighter. Levi stepped closer and extended a hand. "Miss Grace," he said, like her name was something sacred. "You've got mud on your boots, fire in your eyes, and the kind of strength most men couldn't carry. Now, you coming with me?" Something in her cracked, then held. She reached out, hand trembling, and let him take her carpet bag. He swung it onto the back of his saddle, then offered his hand again to help her mount. She placed her foot in the stirrup, hoisted herself with effort. It wasn't elegant, but it was enough. They rode together into the gathering dark, silence stretching between them like a warm quilt. Behind them, Bitter Ridge faded into rain, and somewhere deep in her chest, Annabelle Grace began to breathe again. The trail curled through scraggly pines and wild grass, the storm fading into mist as Levi led her horse with quiet care. Annabelle's fingers clutched the saddle horn, her boots soggy, her bones humming from cold and exhaustion. But the silence between them was gentle, not the brittle kind that came before cruelty. She watched him from behind, his broad back, the way his coat moved with each step. He looked like he belonged to the land, carved from it, not trying to dominate it. They reached the cabin as twilight melted into true dark. Nestled in a hollow near a creek, it was modest, logs darkened by age, a stone chimney puffing thin smoke, and a porch sagging at one end. It looked like the kind of place that had seen storms and laughter in equal measure. Levi tied the mare, then turned to help her down. She hesitated again, still enused to kindness that came without a price. He didn't push, just waited hand out. This time, she took it without hesitation. Inside, the cabin was warm with the scent of burning cedar and something savory simmering in a pot. A single oil lamp cast golden shadows along rough-hewn walls. A rifle hung by the door. A tattered book sat on the mantel. It was sparse but clean. Lived in, not lonely. "Sit," Levi said, gesturing to a chair near the hearth. "I'll fetch dry clothes. They'll be too big, but better than walking pneumonia." She nodded, peeled off her soaked gloves, and moved toward the fire. Heat crawled up her legs like a memory, chasing out the cold. The chair creaked beneath her as she sank into it. Her body was tired, her pride bruised and raw, but she was breathing. That alone felt like a miracle. He returned with folded flannel and trousers. Left them on a wooden trunk near the back room. There's a screen in the corner, he said. Privacy ain't luxury out here, but I can make myself scarce if it helps. I've dressed in train yards, she said quietly. A cabin's an upgrade. She changed behind the screen, flinching as the sodden dress peeled from her skin. Her limp was worse now, muscles stiffening from the cold. She pulled on the flannel shirt, which hung loose around her waist, and cinched the pants with a bit of twine. When she emerged, Levi didn't so much as glance. He simply offered her a steaming mug. Coffee, he said. It's strong. Might put hair on your chest. She took it with both hands. I'll risk it. For a while, they sat in silence. Rain tapped against the windows like restless fingers. The fire snapped and shifted. Annabelle sipped the bitter drink and let it warm the hollow space in her chest. You didn't ask why I was on that platform, she said. Nope. You don't want to know? He glanced over, eyes unreadable. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. Something in her tightened, then loosened. My name's Annabelle Grace. I was promised in marriage to a man named Thomas McGree. We corresponded. He seemed, she hesitated, decent. I thought maybe out here folks wouldn't judge me the way they did back east. What did they judge you for? He asked, not unkindly. She gave a bitter smile. For limping, for not being proper, for refusing to stay quiet when silence was easier. He leaned back in his chair, mug resting on his knee. Folks out here ain't much better, he said. But land like this, it don't care if you walk crooked or cuss too loud. Just cares if you get back up when it kicks you down. She stared into the fire. I didn't expect it to hurt like that, being left in front of strangers like garbage. You weren't garbage, he said. He just didn't see past his own damn reflection. She swallowed hard, lips trembling. You don't even know me. I know what pain looks like when it's packed neat and carried quiet. That silenced her. The air between them settled, heavier but not suffocating, just full of truths neither had spoken before. She looked around, letting herself notice things. How his boots were well-worn but clean, how the cabin had small signs of care. A quilt folded neatly, a chipped mug patched with resin. The book on the mantel, The Last of the Mohicans. Who do you read for? She asked. He followed her gaze. Myself. Words help when the whiskey don't. You're not what I expected from a man out here. And what did you expect? Rough hands, sharper tongue. He shrugged. Got both. I just don't use them on women running from pain. Her throat tightened again. You got family back east? He asked. She shook her head. My father died in a mill accident when I was 10. My mother remarried a preacher who said I was a burden. Too much sin in my blood. I limped because of the Lord's punishment, he said. You start to believe it after a while. Levi's brow furrowed. That's horse rot. God ain't in the business of crippling little girls. I know that now, she said. Took me a while. The firelight danced across her face, warming her cheeks, making her look softer than she felt. He watched her quietly for a beat, then stood. Eat, he said, lifting the lid off a cast-iron pot. The smell of rabbit stew filled the room. He ladled it into 2 bowls, set them on the table. Then rest. Tomorrow's another fight, whether you asked for one or not. She smiled at that. You always talk like you're narrating a sermon. Only when the audience looks like they could use savant. They ate without much talk. The stew was salty and thick, and she could taste the care in it. Someone who cooked because it needed doing, not to impress. By the time her bowl was empty, she felt full for the first time in days. Levi cleaned the bowls and poured water from a pitcher into a tin basin. You can take the bed, he said. I'll sleep near the fire. I can't take your bed, she said, rising. He held up a hand. I've slept colder places. Their eyes met. Hers searching, his steady. She nodded. Before turning in, she hesitated. Why'd you help me? He paused at the fireplace, poking a log. You were standing alone in a storm with nowhere to go. I've been there. It ain't right, leaving someone in the dark just 'cause they don't fit the picture. She moved toward the bed slowly, leg aching with every step. The room was simple. A shelf with a candle, a blanket folded at the foot. She sat on the edge, fingers curled into the fabric. As she lay down, the mattress creaked under her, but it was soft. Safe. She turned to the wall, listening to the rustle of Levi settling into his own blanket by the hearth. The fire crackled. Rain whispered on the roof. Somewhere out in the trees, a coyote howled. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they were not from fear or shame. Just as sleep began to pull her under, she heard his voice, low and quiet. "You ain't broken, Annabelle. Just been a little from carrying too much." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. She smiled into the dark, let the warmth sink into her bones, and dreamed of things she'd never let herself hope for. Outside, the storm finally passed, and in the morning, the sun would rise on something new. The morning came with gold-streaked clouds and the faint scent of rain still clinging to the grass. Annabelle stepped out onto the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, Levi's mug of bitter coffee warming her hands. She watched as he chopped wood near the tree line, axe rising and falling with practiced rhythm. His shirt clung to his back, damp with effort, and his expression was carved from quiet focus. She still limped. That hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She'd slept through the night, deep and dreamless, the kind of rest she hadn't known since childhood. And when she opened her eyes to sunlight and the sound of a man humming tunelessly as he stoked the fire, she had to remind herself it wasn't a dream. Levi looked up from the woodpile and gave her a small nod. That was how it was with him, words reserved for when they mattered. That afternoon, while tending to the small garden beside the cabin, Annabelle noticed something odd. Hoof prints. Fresh ones. More than one horse. She turned slowly, gaze sweeping the trees, but saw nothing. Her stomach coiled tight. When Levi returned from checking the traps near the ridge, she told him. He looked at the tracks, then at the trees. His jaw tensed. "These ain't mine." She swallowed. "You think it's McGree?" Levi didn't answer right away. He crouched down, fingers brushing the earth. "He's got a reputation," he said finally. "Not for being mean, for being proud. The kind that don't like to be embarrassed in public." "I humiliated him," she whispered. "You survived him," Levi corrected. That night, Levi didn't sleep. He sat near the window with his rifle across his knees. Annabelle offered to keep watch, but he just shook his head. "Sleep, Annabelle. If trouble comes, you'll know it." She lay in bed listening to the fire crackle, her heart drumming a slow rhythm of dread. The first gunshot came just before dawn. It shattered the silence like glass. Levi was on his feet before the echo faded, dragging the table down for cover. "Stay down," he shouted. Another shot punched through the window frame, splinters flying. Annabelle hit the floor, crawling toward the hearth. Levi fired back. One clean shot that silenced the air for a heartbeat. 3 more horses circled the cabin. She could hear their hooves thudding against the dirt, shouts in the distance. Levi moved like a man who'd seen war. Calm, precise. No panic in his eyes, only calculation. "Back door," he said. "We slip out, circle to the tree line. They'll see us," she said, heart hammering. "Only if they're looking the right way." He handed her a pistol. It felt too heavy, too cold. "I've never fired one," she admitted. "Point and squeeze. Loud's all that matters." They ducked low, crept through the back. The cabin groaned under weight and age, every step threatening to betray them. As they slipped into the trees, Levi glanced back once, jaw tight. He didn't want to leave the place, but survival came first. They crawled along a ridge, leaves damp under their palms. The gunmen had stopped shooting, searching now, circling like wolves. From their hiding place, Annabelle could see one rider dismount and creep toward the cabin with a torch in hand. The fire caught fast. Levi muttered a curse under his breath. "Why burn it?" she whispered. "To send a message," he replied, "or to punish what they can't control." The flames consumed the cabin quickly, throwing light across the clearing. Shadows danced wildly. One of the men stood too close to the fire. Levi took the shot. He dropped. The others scattered, returning fire. "Down!" Levi shouted, pulling her close behind the ridge. Bullets cracked through the branches above. Annabelle pressed her body into the earth, dirt in her teeth, heart racing. "I can't lose you," she said, voice barely audible over the noise. "You won't," Levi said. "But if I do fall, you run. You run fast and hard, and don't look back." She shook her head violently. "I'm not running again." The standoff didn't last long. The attackers hadn't come expecting resistance, let alone a man with a rifle and a woman willing to stand beside him. When another of their number fell with a scream, the remaining two turned and rode off into the trees, firing wild shots as they fled. Silence returned slowly, filled with smoke and the scent of burned wood. Levi rose, breathing hard. "You all right?" She nodded. Her hands trembled, but she was still on her feet. The cabin was gone. Nothing but charred beams and smoke rising against a pale sky. She stared at it for a long time. The place that had felt like the start of something. It was now just another scar. But Levi was alive. And she was too. They'd buried the men near the creek. Didn't speak much while doing it. Just worked with tired hands and hollow silence. By noon, they'd found shelter in a hunter's cave Levi knew from years ago. Dry, tucked into a cliffside, with a flat stone ledge they could sleep on. He built a small fire. She sat across from him, watching the shadows crawl across his face. He leaned forward finally, elbows on his knees. "I was a soldier once," he said. "Thought I was doing good. One raid. We were supposed to clear a camp. Only when we got there, it wasn't soldiers. Just families. Kids." Her breath caught. One girl got caught in the fire. I went in after her. Pulled her out. That's how I got this. He touched the scar on his cheek. "My commander told me. I disobeyed orders. Said the burn was my punishment. Got discharged with nothing but that." Annabelle didn't speak. Just watched him with eyes that saw everything now. His silence, his solitude, the way he gave without expecting anything in return. "You think we're just bent," she said quietly. "But maybe we're just proof that the world doesn't break what's already brave." He looked at her then, eyes warm. Tired. Honest. "Maybe," he said. She reached in her coat and pulled out the ruined letter. The ink had bled in the rain. McGree's name smudged to obscurity. "I came out here thinking someone would save me," she whispered. "Now I know I had to save myself first." "You did," he said. "But if you don't mind someone walking beside you while you do it, I reckon I'd be proud to be that man." She blinked at him, breath caught. "I ain't got much left," he said, voice soft now. "But I've got my hands, my name, and what's left of this heart. If you'll have me, Annabelle Grace, I'd be honored to make a new life with you." She stared at him, his soot-streaked shirt, his tired smile, the steady truth in his eyes. There was no ring, no ceremony, no flowers. But there was love, the kind that didn't need pretty words or polished promises. She leaned forward, took his hand in both of hers. "You're not what I expected when I came west," she said. "You're better." The cave was quiet except for the fire crackling between them, and the soft sound of two people choosing each other in a world that had tried so hard to make them believe they never could. Bitter Ridge stirred slow after sunrise, dust curling through its narrow streets like old regrets. Word had spread like wildfire on dry brush. McGree's hired men were dead. The cabin had burned, and the girl he'd rejected, the one with the limp, hadn't disappeared. She'd survived. Worse yet, she'd stayed. Annabelle stood just outside the sheriff's office, chin high, heart steady. Her boots were dust-worn, her dress simple but clean, and her eyes were lit with the kind of fire that didn't burn out. It burned through. Levi stood beside her, arms crossed, broad shoulders casting long shadows. He hadn't shaved in days, and the bruises on his temple were still visible, but his presence was thunderous. Sheriff Dunley stepped out, gray-bearded and bone-weary, the kind of man who'd seen too many years and not enough justice. "You got witnesses?" he asked, tipping his hat toward them. Levi nodded once. "We buried 2 of his men ourselves. They came armed and lit a match to my home." "I saw the smoke," the sheriff admitted. "Didn't think it was your place until I heard talk. McGree's been whispering about you 2 for days. Said you were trespassing. Said you'd lured his wife-to-be into something sinful." Annabelle stepped forward, voice steady as a bell. "He rejected me in public, left me on the platform like I was nothing. He forfeited his claim to any opinion the moment he turned his back." "True enough," Dunley said, scratching his beard. "Still, he's a man of influence. Can't lock him up without proof." "Proof," Levi echoed. "I've got scorched earth and bullet holes. And I've got the scars on my hands," Annabelle added, lifting her palm, where a fresh burn had just begun to scab. Dunley looked between them, then let out a long, hard sigh. Fine. You give me one more witness. Just one. Someone in this town who'll speak against McGree, and I'll see he faces trial. They left the office and walked in silence. Later that afternoon, as the sun lowered toward the ridge, Levi leaned against the rail of the general store while Annabelle ducked inside. He watched the street like a hawk, waiting, always waiting. He knew the kind of men McGree hired. They didn't believe in consequences. Just clean up. When Annabelle emerged, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a girl no older than 10, freckles across her nose, and one foot that dragged slightly behind the other. She stared up at Levi, wide-eyed. She saw it. Annabelle said softly, "Saw McGree's men ride out after me the day they burned the cabin." She didn't tell anyone because she was scared. "I ain't scared now," the girl said. "You're the one who helped Ma when the doc wouldn't see her, remember? Ma said people like you, people who've been through fire, they don't run when things get hot." Levi knelt in front of the girl. "You willing to say that in front of the sheriff?" She nodded, all defiance and pride. By morning, McGree was in irons. The town watched as he was marched through the square, spitting and swearing, his fancy clothes stained with sweat. He turned to Annabelle as he passed and sneered, "You'll regret this, cripple." She didn't flinch, just said, "I already did, the moment I believed you might be worth my time." The trial was short. The sheriff kept his word. With the girl's testimony and the evidence of the attack, McGree was stripped of land rights, fined, and sentenced to 6 months in a prison camp 2 counties west. For a man like him, it may as well have been death. Annabelle didn't smile when they took him away. She didn't need to. Justice wasn't about joy. It was about restoration. The town changed after that. People nodded to her now, spoke her name with respect. The same men who had once chuckled when she limped now tipped their hats. The saloon keeper offered her and Levi a plot of land behind the livery, free for a year if Levi helped rebuild the barn. They accepted. In a week, a small cabin stood where there had been nothing but weeds. It wasn't fancy, but it had 4 walls, a window, and a future. On the last Saturday of the month, under a cottonwood tree that reached for the sky like it was praying, Levi stood with Annabelle before a weathered preacher who smelled of pipe tobacco and Bible ink. She wore a dress the town women had sewn together from scraps of muslin and lace. It didn't shimmer, but it flowed when she walked, and Levi looked at her like she was the first and last good thing he'd ever seen. The preacher cleared his throat, adjusted his spectacles, and said, "Now, I ain't one for long-winded sermons, and you two look like you've already been through enough fire to know how hot it gets. So I'll just ask, Levi Callahan, do you take this woman to be yours, come hail or high water?" "I do," Levi said, loud enough to make the wind pause. "And Annabelle Grace, do you take this man, come dust or thunder?" "I do," she whispered, a smile blooming slow and bright. "Well then," the preacher said, chuckling, "by the power vested in me by the good folks of Bitter Ridge and the fact that you two are clearly too stubborn to die alone, I pronounce you husband and wife." Someone in the crowd let off a celebratory shotgun blast that scared the horses and knocked the preacher's hat clean off. Laughter followed. Wild West humor, rowdy and unfiltered. Levi kissed her gently, then fiercely. When they pulled apart, the crowd erupted in cheers, clapping and hollering like it was the 4th of July. Later that night, as the stars spread like silver dust across the sky, Annabelle stood on the porch of their new cabin, leaning into Levi's side. The cicadas hummed. The creek whispered. The past, those years of rejection, shame, and fear, seemed like shadows too weak to touch her now. "Think we'll make it?" she asked. Levi rested a hand on her waist. "We already did." She leaned into him, her limp now just a part of her rhythm, not a curse. He didn't see it anymore. Neither did she. The door creaked open behind them, and the smell of stew drifted out. Her recipe this time. Something simple, warm, the kind of thing that told a man he was home. They went inside together, hand in hand, leaving the past outside where it belonged. And in the glow of that little cabin, beneath stars too many to count, Annabelle Grace Callahan finally understood. She hadn't been rescued. She'd risen. from ashes, from shame, from the words that once tried to define her. She had chosen love, chosen courage, chosen herself. And as the fire crackled and laughter curled around their walls, the story of the girl who was once rejected became legend in Bitter Ridge. The kind of legend folks told around fires when they wanted to remind themselves that even in the wildest places, love still finds a way. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.